The blizzard came out of nowhere, turning the Colorado sky into a wall of white fury that threatened to swallow Diana Harper whole as she clutched the reins of her exhausted mare and prayed for shelter before the cold claimed them both. She had left Denver 3 days ago with nothing but a small bag of belongings, $17 to her name, and a desperate need to escape a future that had been decided for her by people who cared nothing for what she wanted. Her stepfather had arranged a marriage to a banker twice her age, a man with cold hands and colder eyes who looked at her like she was property to be acquired. At 22 years old, Diana had finally found the courage to refuse to run, even if it meant facing the unforgiving wilderness of the Colorado Territory in late December of 1883. The wind howled around her, cutting through her wool coat as though it were made of paper. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, and she could no longer feel her feet in the stirrups. The mare stumbled again, and Diana knew they would not last much longer. She squinted through the driving snow, searching desperately for any sign of shelter, any hint that they were not alone in this frozen wasteland. Then, like a miracle emerging from the white chaos, she saw it. A fence post, then another, and beyond them the dark outline of buildings. A ranch. Diana urged her mare forward with the last of her strength, following the fence line toward what she hoped would be salvation. Thomas Zimmerman had been preparing for the storm since dawn, moving his cattle closer to the barn, securing shutters, and stacking extra firewood by the house. The weather in the mountains near Rico could turn deadly without warning, and after 10 years of running this ranch alone, he knew better than to take chances. At 31 years old, he had seen enough harsh winters to respect their power. He was heading from the barn back to the house when he saw the figure hunched over a horse near his front gate. Thomas stopped, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he carried, then falling away when he realized the rider was barely staying in the saddle. He ran forward, his boots crunching through the deepening snow. The woman looked up as he approached, her face pale as death, her lips tinged blue. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes and the dark hair that had escaped from beneath her hat. She tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. "Easy now," Thomas said, reaching up to steady her as she swayed dangerously. "I have got you." Diana felt strong arms catch her as she slid from the saddle, her legs refusing to hold her weight. The man was tall and solid, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that might have been handsome if it were not set in such grim lines. His eyes were a striking pale blue, like ice reflecting sky, and they held a wariness that went deeper than concern for a stranger caught in a storm. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse as though he did not speak often. "I think so," Diana managed through chattering teeth. "My horse. I will see to the mare. Let us get you inside before you freeze to death on my doorstep." He half carried her toward the house, kicking the door open and bringing her into a front room that felt wonderfully warm after hours in the bitter cold. He deposited her in a chair near the fireplace and moved efficiently to build up the flames. Diana's hands began to burn as feeling returned to them, the pain almost unbearable. She bit back a cry, clenching her jaw against the waves of agony that accompanied her thawing fingers and toes. Thomas glanced back at her, noting her white-knuckled grip on the chair arms. "The pain means you still have all your parts. That is good." He disappeared into another room and returned with a thick quilt, which he draped around her shoulders. "Do not get too close to the fire yet. Warm up slowly, or it will hurt worse." He left her then, going back out into the storm. Diana huddled in the chair, pulling the quilt tighter around herself and taking in her surroundings. The house was well built and solid, with furniture that showed signs of age but was clean and well maintained. Everything was orderly, almost militarily so, but there was a stark quality to it as well. No photographs on the mantel, no decorative touches that spoke of a woman's presence, no touches that spoke of joy or warmth beyond the purely practical. Thomas returned 15 minutes later, stamping snow from his boots. "Your mare is bedded down in the barn with food and water. She will be fine." He moved to the kitchen area, which opened onto the main room, and began pumping water into a kettle. "Are you running from the law?" The directness of the question startled Deanna. "No, nothing like that. Running from something, though." It was not a question. He set the kettle on the stove and added wood to the firebox beneath it. "You do not ride out in weather like this unless you are desperate or stupid, and you do not look stupid." Diana found herself wanting to smile despite everything. There was something refreshing about his bluntness after years of her stepfather's manipulative duplicity. "Running from a marriage I did not want." Thomas turned to look at her properly for the first time, really studying her face. She was beautiful, he realized with a start that felt like a punch to his chest. Even half frozen and exhausted, with her dark hair in tangles and her fine-boned face pinched with cold, she was the loveliest thing he had seen in years. The realization made him uncomfortable, and he looked away quickly. "That is a reasonable thing to run from," he said finally. "Are they likely to come looking for you? Eventually, I suppose, but they will look east toward family in Kansas. I doubt they will think I came into the mountains." Deanna hesitated. "I can pay for room and board, not much, but I have a little money. Keep your money." Thomas poured hot water into a cup and added tea leaves. "No one turns away a person in need during a storm. That is just basic human decency." He brought her the tea, careful not to let his fingers brush hers as she took it. "I am Thomas Zimmerman. This is my ranch, the Triple Z. You are about 5 miles south of Rico. Diana Harper. And thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same." He busied himself preparing food, slicing bread and cheese, then heating up a pot of stew that had been simmering on the stove. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. Deanna sipped her tea and watched him move around the kitchen with the efficient economy of someone who had been living alone for a long time. When he brought her a bowl of stew and a thick slice of bread, she realized she was ravenous. She ate quickly, hardly tasting the food, driven by pure need. Thomas ate his own meal standing up, leaning against the counter, watching the storm through the window. "How long do you think it will last?" Deanna asked. "Could be a day, could be 3. Hard to say." "These mountain storms have their own schedule." He glanced at her. "You are welcome to stay until it passes and the roads are safe again. I do not want to impose. You already imposed by nearly dying on my property. Might as well see it through." There was the faintest hint of dry humor in his voice, so subtle Deanna almost missed it. She found herself studying him more carefully. Thomas Zimmerman was a big man, probably 6 feet tall or close to it, with the kind of solid build that came from years of hard physical labor. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face weathered by sun and wind. His light brown hair was a bit too long, curling slightly at his collar, and he had not shaved in several days. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, those startling pale blue eyes that held a deep sadness she recognized, because she had seen something similar in her own reflection for years. This was a man who had known loss. "There is a bedroom at the back of the house," Thomas said, interrupting her thoughts. "It is small, but the bed is good. You should rest. You have been through an ordeal." Deanna wanted to protest that she was fine, but exhaustion was crashing over her like a wave now that she was warm and fed. "Thank you. I am more tired than I realized." He showed her to a small room that held a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and little else. but it was clean and the quilts looked warm and inviting. Deanna sank onto the bed gratefully. "Sleep as long as you need," Thomas said from the doorway. "I will be up for a while yet, checking on things. If you need anything, just call out." He closed the door softly behind him, leaving Deanna alone in the quiet room. She could hear the wind howling outside, rattling the shutters, but inside she was warm and safe. She pulled off her damp clothes, hanging them on pegs on the wall, and crawled under the quilts in her chemise and petticoat. Within minutes, she was asleep. Thomas stood in the main room, listening to the storm and trying not to think about the woman sleeping in his back bedroom. It had been 3 years since Mary died. 3 years since he had lost his wife and unborn child to a fever that had swept through the region, taking so many with it. 3 years since he had closed off that part of himself that knew how to feel anything beyond the simple satisfaction of hard work and tired muscles. He had loved Mary with everything in him. They had been childhood friends in Kansas, had married young and come west together to build a life. She had been his entire world. When she died, something in him had died too. He had kept the ranch running because it was what she would have wanted, because the cattle still needed feeding and the work did not stop for grief. But he had not truly lived since then, just existed in a gray world where nothing mattered much and nothing brought joy. Having a woman in the house again felt strange and unsettling, like a ghost from another life. The sound of her breathing, the knowledge that someone else was there in the space he had occupied alone for so long, made him restless and uncomfortable in ways he could not quite name. He forced himself to focus on practical matters. The storm would likely keep them snowed in for at least 2 days. He had plenty of supplies, but he would need to check on the livestock regularly, make sure the barn was holding up, keep the paths clear. Work. That was what he knew, what kept him grounded. Thomas checked the fire one last time, then retired to his own bedroom on the opposite end of the house. Sleep was a long time coming. Deanna woke to pale sunlight filtering through the shutters and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, then the events of the previous day came flooding back. The storm, the desperate ride, the taciturn rancher who had taken her in. She sat up, noting that her clothes were still damp. That was going to be a problem. She wrapped a quilt around herself and ventured out into the main room. Thomas was at the stove, frying eggs and bacon. He glanced up as she appeared, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," she said, suddenly feeling awkward and vulnerable in her makeshift covering. "Morning. There is coffee if you want it. Cups are in the cabinet there." He gestured with his spatula. "Your clothes are not going to be dry enough to wear yet. I can lend you some things of mine for now. They will be too big, but better than nothing. I do not want to be any trouble. If you were trouble, I would have left you in the snow." He slid eggs and bacon onto 2 plates. "Sit down and eat." Deanna did as she was told, clutching the quilt around herself with one hand and managing her coffee cup with the other. The food was simple but good, and she ate with an appetite that would have scandalized her stepmother. Proper young ladies were supposed to pick at their food delicately, not shovel it in like field hands. Thomas finished his breakfast quickly and stood. "I need to go check on the animals. I will leave some clothes on your bed. Help yourself to whatever you need while I am gone." He shrugged into a heavy coat, pulled on gloves, and headed out into the brilliant white world beyond the door. Deanna took the opportunity to explore a bit more, though she was careful not to invade his privacy. The house was larger than she had realized, with 3 bedrooms, a good-sized kitchen and living area, and even a small room that looked like it might have been intended as an office or study. Everything was meticulously maintained but sparse, as though the inhabitant had pared his life down to only what was absolutely necessary. In her room, she found a stack of clothes as promised. A work shirt that would hang to her knees, a pair of trousers with suspenders, thick wool socks. She dressed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs, cinching the waist as best she could. She looked ridiculous, but at least she was covered and warm. She spent the next hour making herself useful, washing the breakfast dishes, sweeping the floor, organizing the small pantry that had been in a state of bachelor-level disarray. When Thomas returned, stamping snow from his boots and bringing a blast of cold air with him, he stopped short at the sight of the tidied kitchen. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I need to earn my keep somehow. You are feeding me and giving me shelter. The least I can do is help with the housework." Deanna poured him a fresh cup of coffee without being asked. "How are the animals?" "Cold but fine. The barn is solid." He wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into his chilled fingers. "The storm has passed, but there is at least 2 feet of snow out there, maybe more in the drifts. It will be a few days before the roads are passable." "I understand. I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Zimmerman. You can call me Thomas. Mr. Zimmerman was my father." He hesitated. "And you should know, it is nice having the house look lived in again. I have gotten careless about such things." It was a small admission, but Deanna sensed it cost him something to make it. She smiled. "Well, I am happy to help. What else needs doing?" They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Thomas handled the outdoor work, the constant demands of keeping a ranch running in winter weather. Deanna took over the household tasks, cooking meals that were more varied and better seasoned than anything Thomas had eaten in years, keeping the house clean, even mending a pile of shirts and trousers she found stuffed in a basket, clearly long neglected. They talked during meals, tentative conversations that gradually grew longer and more comfortable. Deanna told him about growing up in Denver, about her mother who had died when she was 16 and the stepfather who had gradually become more controlling as she grew older. She spoke of her love for books and music, things she had left behind in her flight. Thomas listened more than he talked, but gradually he began to share bits of his own story. The ranch he had built with his wife, the dreams they had shared, the way everything had fallen apart when she died. "I kept thinking the grief would fade," he said one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. "Everyone said time heals, but it does not heal, not really. You just learn to carry it differently." "I think that is true," Deanna said softly. "When my mother died, I thought I would never stop hurting, and I have not entirely. But the pain became part of me instead of being all of me." "Is that what you mean?" "Something like that." He stared into the flames. "I stopped trying to feel anything for a while. It was easier that way." "But lonely." "Yes, very lonely." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Deanna felt her breath catch at the intensity in those pale eyes. "You being here has reminded me what it feels like to not be alone. I do not know if that is a good thing or not." "Why would it not be good?" "Because you are going to leave when the road's clear. You have places to go, a life to build somewhere else. And I will go back to being alone, except now I will remember what I have been missing." Deanna wanted to tell him that she did not have anywhere to go, no grand plans beyond getting away from Denver. She wanted to say that these few days in his house had felt more like home than anywhere she had lived in years. But the words seemed too large, too presumptuous for the fragile connection growing between them. "Maybe being reminded is not such a bad thing," she said instead, "even if it hurts a little." Thomas did not answer, but something in his expression softened, and Deanna thought maybe he understood what she was trying to say. On the 5th day, Thomas announced that the main road into Rico had been cleared enough for travel. "I need to go into town for supplies," he said over breakfast. "You can come with me if you want. It is not much of a town, but there is a general store and a boarding house if you need a place to stay while you figure out your next move." Diana felt a sinking sensation in her chest. Of course, he was giving her a polite way to leave, to move on with her life. It was the natural next step. She could not stay on his ranch indefinitely, living in his house, wearing his clothes. It was not proper, and more than that, it was not fair to him. He had his own life, his own routines. She was an interruption, however pleasant. "That would be good," she heard herself say. "Thank you." They made the trip into Rico in Thomas's wagon, the horses pulling steadily through the snow-packed road. The town was small, just a cluster of buildings nestled in the valley with mountains rising dramatically on all sides. It had started as a mining town and still bore the rough-edged quality of a place built more for function than beauty. But it had a certain charm, Diana thought, a sense of community forged by isolation and harsh conditions. Thomas stopped first at the general store, a long building with a false front and large windows displaying various goods. Diana followed him inside, grateful for the warmth and the smell of coffee and spices. A woman behind the counter looked up as they entered, her eyes widening slightly with interest. "Thomas Zimmerman, as I live and breathe," she said, coming around the counter. She was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. "I have not seen you in town in 2 months. I was beginning to think you had frozen to death out there." "Just busy, Mrs. Carter. You know how it is." Thomas gestured to Diana. "This is Diana Harper. She got caught in the storm last week and has been staying at my place until the roads cleared." Mrs. Carter's eyes sharpened even more, taking in Diana's appearance with clear curiosity. "Is that so? Well, welcome to Rico, Miss Harper. I am Sarah Carter. My husband and I run this store." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Carter," Diana said politely. "Thomas, I will need the usual supplies," Thomas said, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Flour, sugar, coffee, beans, you know the list." "Of course. I will have Jacob put it together." She called toward the back of the store, and a young man appeared to take Thomas's order. "Mrs. Carter turned back to Diana. "Are you just passing through, dear, or planning to stay in Rico?" "I am not sure yet," Diana admitted. "I am looking for work, actually. Is there anything available in town?" Mrs. Carter considered. "The boarding house could probably use help. Old Mrs. Henderson is getting on in years and struggles with the upkeep. There is also the school. Our teacher, Miss Prout, has been talking about wanting an assistant, especially with the younger children." "Can you read and write?" "Yes, and I can do figures as well. I had a good education." "That is rare out here. Most folks can barely sign their names." Mrs. Carter glanced at Thomas, who was studiously examining a display of rope as though it were the most fascinating thing in the world. "Of course, Thomas has that big ranch all to himself. I am sure he could use help around the place, someone to manage the house and help with the books. Ranching is more than just cattle, after all." Thomas turned, his jaw tight. "Mrs. Carter, I am sure Miss Harper has her own plans." "I am just saying, it seems a shame for her to be scrubbing floors at the boarding house when she clearly has more to offer. And you rattling around in that big house all alone is not natural, Thomas. It has been 3 years. Mary would not have wanted you to shut yourself away from the world." "That is not your concern," Thomas said, his voice hard. "Maybe not, but I knew Mary Zimmerman, and I know she would have wanted you to have help if you needed it. That is all I am saying." Mrs. Carter turned back to Diana, her expression gentling. "Think about it, dear. A ranch needs a lot of managing. If you are good with figures and can keep a house running, that is valuable work and should be compensated accordingly." Diana did not know what to say. The idea of staying at the ranch, of not having to leave, made her heart leap. but Thomas's rigid posture and closed-off expression told her he was not pleased with Mrs. Carter's suggestion. He had offered her refuge during the storm out of basic decency, not because he wanted a permanent house guest. Jacob returned with boxes of supplies, and Thomas paid quickly, clearly eager to leave. They loaded the wagon in silence, and Deanna felt the comfortable ease that had developed between them dissolving into awkwardness. On the ride back to the ranch, Thomas finally spoke. "I apologize for Mrs. Carter. She means well, but she does not know when to mind her own business. She was just trying to help," Deanna said quietly, "by putting you in an uncomfortable position and implying that I need charity. I do not think that is what she meant." Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the road, turning to look at her directly. "What do you want, Deanna? Really want? Because if you need work and a place to stay, I can help with that, but I need to know what you are looking for." Deanna took a breath, gathering her courage. "I want a place where I belong. A place where I am wanted for who I am, not for what someone can make me into. I want to do work that matters and be with people who value me. I do not need much beyond that. I know staying at your ranch is probably not proper, but I have not felt at home anywhere in years, and these past days with you have felt more like home than anything I can remember." Thomas's expression shifted, something breaking through the careful guard he kept over his emotions. "You do not know how hard it has been having you there. Not because you are a burden, but because you made me remember what it was like to want something beyond just getting through another day. You made me want to talk again, to share meals with someone, to care about whether the house looked nice or the food tasted good. And that terrified me because I knew you would leave, and I would have to go back to the emptiness." "What if I did not leave?" Deanna asked, her heart pounding. "What if I stayed and worked for you, properly hired as a housekeeper and assistant? It would be a business arrangement, perfectly respectable. I would earn my keep and have a place to live, and you would have help managing the ranch. We both need what the other can offer." Thomas studied her face for a long moment. "Is that what you really want? To be my employee?" "I want to stay," Deanna said honestly. "The details we can figure out as we go." Something like relief washed over his features. "Then stay. We will work out fair wages and proper arrangements. You can have that back bedroom permanently, and I will stay on my side of the house. We will keep everything appropriate." "Agreed." Deanna held out her hand to shake on it, and after a moment's hesitation, Thomas took it. His hand was warm and rough, completely engulfing hers, and the simple contact sent a shiver up her arm that had nothing to do with the cold. They returned to the ranch with a new understanding between them, an acknowledged arrangement that allowed Deanna to stay without impropriety. But both of them knew, though neither would have admitted it aloud, that something had shifted between them that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way her smile made his chest feel lighter, the way his rare laughter made her feel like she had accomplished something remarkable. Winter deepened, and they settled into their new routine. Deanna proved herself invaluable, not just with housework but with the ranch itself. She had a good head for numbers and began organizing Thomas's scattered records, creating a proper system for tracking expenses and income. She learned to help with feeding the animals when weather made it a two-person job, surprising Thomas with her willingness to work hard and get her hands dirty. For his part, Thomas found himself coming up with excuses to spend more time at the house, to linger over meals and share more of himself than he had in years. He taught Deanna to ride properly, taking her out on clear days to check fence lines and look for strays. He told her stories about the ranch, about his life before tragedy struck, and slowly the gray world he had been living in began to show hints of color again. One evening in late January, Deanna found him in the barn, tending to a mare that was due to foal soon. She watched him work for a moment, noting the gentleness in his rough hands, the patience in his movements. "You love this life," she said softly. Thomas looked up, surprised. "I do. I grew up wanting to be a rancher, to have my own land and build something lasting. Even after everything that happened, I still love it." "Mary must have loved it too, to come out here with you." He nodded slowly. It no longer hurt quite as much to hear her name, a development he attributed entirely to Deanna's presence. "She did. She was braver than me in a lot of ways. This life is not easy for women. The isolation, the hard work, the danger, but she never complained, never regretted coming west with me." "I think I understand why," Deanna said, stepping closer. "There is something about this place, about the mountains and the space and the sense that you are building something real. It gets into your blood." Thomas stood, brushing hay from his trousers, acutely aware of how close she was, how the lantern light made her dark hair gleam. "You have taken to ranch life better than I expected. Most city women would have run back to Denver the first time they had to help birth a calf. I am not most city women. And besides, I do not think of Denver as home anymore." She met his eyes. "This feels more like home than anywhere else I have been." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with words neither of them was quite ready to say. Thomas reached out, almost unconsciously, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Diana's breath caught at the touch, her eyes widening. "Deanna," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "You are not just my employee. You have not been for a while now, and if I am being honest, you never really were. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. You have brought something back into my life that I thought was dead and buried, and I do not know what to do with that except tell you the truth. I care about you. More than I should, more than is probably wise, but I do." Diana felt tears prick her eyes. "Oh, Thomas. I have been so afraid to hope that you might feel the same way I do. I have loved being here with you, loved every conversation and every moment we have spent together. You have made me feel valued and seen in a way I never have before. I do not want to be just your employee either. I want to be more than that, if you will let me." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "I am not an easy man, Deanna. I am set in my ways and I carry grief that will probably never fully leave me. I do not know if I can be the man you deserve." "You are exactly the man I want," she said fiercely. "I do not need perfect. I need real and honest and true, and that is what you are. That is what you have been since the moment you pulled me from my horse and saved my life." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more needful. Deanna wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and Thomas held her like she was something precious and fragile that might disappear if he loosened his grip. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want to dishonor you. We should do this properly." "What does that mean?" "It means I should court you like a gentleman with proper intentions and an eye toward the future." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "It means if you will have me, I want to marry you, Deanna Harper. I want you to be my wife, not just someone who lives in my house and helps with my work. I want to build a life with you the way I once did with Mary. That is not a betrayal of her memory. I think she would be glad to know I found a reason to live fully again." Deanna felt happiness bloom in her chest, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They made plans that night, sitting close together on the sofa long after they should have gone to their separate rooms. They would marry in the spring, after the mountain passes cleared, and they could bring in a proper minister from the larger town of Telluride. In the meantime, they would maintain their separate sleeping arrangements, though the emotional boundaries between them had well and truly dissolved. The winter months passed in a glow of new love and anticipation. Thomas became more relaxed, more open, as though Diana's presence had thawed something frozen inside him. He smiled more, laughed more, and began making plans for the future instead of just surviving day to day. Diana thrived in the role of rancher's future wife, learning everything she could about cattle and horses, about reading weather and managing land. They went into Rico together in early March to order supplies for their upcoming wedding, and found the whole town abuzz with gossip about the lonely rancher who had finally found love again. Mrs. Carter was particularly smug about the whole thing, claiming she had known all along that Diana was exactly what Thomas needed. "I am happy for you, Thomas," she said sincerely, as she helped Diana pick out fabric for a wedding dress. "Mary was a good woman, and I know she would approve of you moving forward. And Diana, you have done something remarkable. I have not seen Thomas smile like this since before the fever. That is a gift." Thomas and Diana were married on a clear day in late April of 1884, with the mountains still wearing caps of snow but the valley below bursting with spring wildflowers. A small crowd gathered at the ranch, neighbors from surrounding properties and friends from town who had known Thomas for years and were genuinely glad to see him happy again. Diana wore a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored silk, her dark hair crowned with wildflowers. Thomas wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothes, but unable to stop smiling as he watched his bride walk toward him across the meadow near the house. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, conducted by a traveling minister who made his rounds through the mountain communities. When Thomas slipped the ring onto Diana's finger, a simple gold band he had commissioned from a jeweler in Telluride, his hand trembled slightly. When Diana said her vows, her voice was clear and strong, full of joy and certainty. They celebrated with a feast prepared by the women of Rico, with music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Thomas, who claimed he could not dance, let Diana pull him into a simple waltz under the stars, and she laughed at his awkwardness and loved him all the more for being willing to try. When the last guests had finally left and they were alone, really alone for the first time as husband and wife, Thomas took Diana's hands in his. "I want you to know something," he said seriously. "Mary will always be part of my past, part of who I became, but you are my future, Diana. You are the reason I want tomorrow to come. I love you with everything in me, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing this life with me." "I could never regret it," Diana said, reaching up to touch his face. "You saved me, Thomas. Not just from the storm, but from a life that would have slowly crushed everything I am. You gave me a home and a purpose and a love I did not know existed. I am exactly where I want to be." He kissed her then, tender and passionate and full of promise, and carried her over the threshold into their home, into their life together. The years that followed were rich with work and love, and the slow building of a life that mattered. Diana threw herself into ranch management with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything, becoming Thomas's true partner in every sense. She handled the books and correspondence, managed the household with skill, and even helped with the heavier work during busy seasons. Their first child, a son they named James, was born in the winter of 1885, arriving during a snowstorm that reminded them both of how they had first met. Thomas paced the floor while the doctor and midwife attended Diana, terrified by the memory of losing Mary to childbirth complications. But Diana was strong and healthy, and their son came into the world squalling with outrage at the cold. Thomas held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Diana, He is absolutely perfect. He has your eyes, Deanna said, exhausted but radiant. Look at that. Ice blue just like his father. They raised James with love and laughter, teaching him to ride as soon as he could sit upright, to love the land and the animals and the rhythms of ranch life. He was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's determination. And then, in 1890, another son, Michael, who was quieter than his siblings but had a gift with horses that amazed everyone. The ranch prospered under Thomas and Deanna's joint management. They expanded their herd, improved their breeding stock, and built a reputation for quality cattle that reached all the way to Denver. They added onto the house, creating more space for their growing family while maintaining the simple, honest character of the original structure. Deanna never forgot what it felt like to be powerless and trapped, and she made it her mission to help other women in similar situations. She started a small lending library in their home, open to anyone in the county who wanted to borrow books. She taught reading and writing to adults who had never had the opportunity to learn. She became known as someone who would help a woman escape a bad situation, offering temporary shelter and assistance in finding work or passage to somewhere safe. Thomas supported her efforts wholeheartedly, proud of her compassion and strength. He had become a different man from the lonely, grief-stricken rancher who had taken in a half-frozen stranger all those years ago. He was lighter now, quicker to laugh, always ready with a kind word or a gentle touch for his wife and children. The darkness of his grief had never fully left him, but it had transformed into something softer, a bittersweet memory rather than a consuming pain. They faced challenges, as all ranchers did. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, injuries and setbacks. But they faced everything together, their partnership forged in the crucible of that first winter, and tempered by years of shared work and shared love. In the evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Thomas and Diana would sit together on the porch they had built facing the mountains, watching the sun set behind the peaks and talking about everything and nothing. These were the moments they treasured most, the quiet intimacy of a love that had grown deep roots. You ever wonder what would have happened if you had turned east instead of south that day? Thomas asked one evening when they were in their 40s, their children nearly grown. Deanna leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content. Not really. It feels like I was always meant to end up here with you, like everything that came before was just the path leading me home. I used to think my life ended when Mary died, Thomas admitted. But now I understand it was just changing direction. I would not have been ready for you if we had met earlier. I needed to learn certain things first, and you needed to find your own strength before you could share your life with someone else. We found each other at exactly the right time, Deanna agreed. Broken and lost and desperate, and somehow that became the foundation for something beautiful. Thomas kissed the top of her head. You made me remember how to smile, Deanna. That first winter when you were just supposed to be sheltering from the storm, you brought light back into my life. I will never stop being grateful for that blizzard. Neither will I, Deanna said softly. Neither will I. As the years continued to pass, their love only deepened. They grew old together on the ranch they had built, surrounded by their children and eventually their grandchildren. James took over most of the daily operations when Thomas's joints began to protest the hard work. But Thomas never fully retired, always needing to be involved, to feel useful. Deanna's hair turned silver, but her eyes remained bright and sharp, and she continued managing the books and correspondence until her hands grew too stiff to write easily. Even then, she dictated letters to her daughter Elizabeth, who had inherited her mother's head for numbers and her father's love of the land. One evening in the summer of 1910, Thomas and Deanna sat together on their porch, now weathered by decades of mountain sun and snow. They were in their late 50s and early 60s, their bodies showing the wear of hard lives well lived. Their children were grown and successful, two of them running ranches of their own while Elizabeth had stayed to help manage the Triple Z with her husband. "You remember the day we met?" Thomas asked, his voice still strong despite his years. Deanna laughed. "How could I forget? I was half frozen and terrified, and you looked at me like you were not sure whether to help me or send me back out into the storm." "I was terrified too," Thomas admitted. "Not of you, but of what you represented, the possibility of feeling again, of caring about someone again. I had convinced myself I was safer alone. But you helped me anyway. I could not have done anything else. You needed help, and that was all that mattered." He took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Best decision I ever made, taking you in that day. You saved my life, Thomas Zimmerman, in more ways than one. You saved mine too. I was alive but not living. You gave me a reason to want more than just survival. You gave me joy again and purpose, and a family I treasure more than anything else in this world." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandson laughing as he played with one of the ranch dogs. The sound of cattle lowing drifted up from the pastures. The smell of dinner cooking wafted from the kitchen where Elizabeth was preparing the evening meal. This was home. This was the life they had built from desperation and loneliness, and a single act of human kindness during a winter storm. Everything they had, everything they were, had grown from that foundation. "I love you," Deanna said quietly. "I have loved you from almost the beginning, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the reason I smiled, Deanna. You always have been, from that first winter until now. You are my heart." They kissed, soft and sweet, a gesture repeated countless times over their decades together, but never losing its power or meaning. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and activity, the legacy of their love made manifest in land and livestock, and the family they had created together. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Thomas and Deanna remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for every moment they had been given. The lonely cowboy had found his reason to smile again in the woman who sought refuge from winter at his ranch, and together they had built something that would last long after they were gone. The Triple Z continued to thrive for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, a testament to what could be built when two people found each other at exactly the right moment and had the courage to open their hearts to the possibility of love. And every winter, when the first snow fell in the Colorado mountains, someone in the family would tell the story of how it all began, of a woman half frozen and desperate, and a man who thought he would never care about anything again, and how they found in each other exactly what they needed to become whole. Their love story became part of the ranch's history, woven into its very foundations, a reminder that sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the most beautiful outcomes, that refuge sought can become home found, that a heart closed by grief can be opened again by kindness and patience, and the simple act of sharing space and time with someone who understands what it means to be lost and then found. Thomas and Deanna lived long, full lives, remaining active and engaged until illness finally claimed Thomas at age 74. Deanna held his hand as he slipped away, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and whispered the same words she had said on their wedding day. "I am exactly where I want to be." She followed him 18 months later, having lived to see one great-grandchild born and the ranch secure in the hands of the fourth generation of Zimmermans. Her last words were a smile and a whispered thank you to no one in particular, or perhaps to everything in general, to the storm and the refuge and the lonely cowboy who had given her a home. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their long lives. But their real monument was the land itself, the thriving ranch that bore Thomas's name and Diana's careful management, the family that carried their values and their stories forward into the future. And sometimes, on winter evenings when snow fell softly on the Colorado mountains, people swore they could see two figures on the old porch, sitting close together, watching the sunset and holding hands the way they had for more than 50 years of marriage. Whether it was real or just a trick of the light and shadows, it did not matter. The love was real, the legacy was real, and the story of how a desperate woman and a grieving man found each other during a winter storm and built a life together remained as true and powerful as the day it began. Their great-great-grandchildren still run the Triple Z today, guided by the principles Thomas and Diana established more than a century ago. Hard work, fair dealing, compassion for those in need, and the understanding that home is not just a place, but a feeling created by people who choose to build something together. The main house has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remains at its heart, preserved and honored as the place where it all began. In Rico, now a small tourist town that caters to skiers and hikers rather than miners and ranchers, there is a plaque in the Historical Society that tells the story of Thomas and Diana Zimmerman, of how their partnership helped shape the region and set an example of what marriage and family could be in the challenging environment of the Old West. School children learn their names, and visitors to the area sometimes drive out to see the ranch, though it remains private property, still worked by their descendants. But the real legacy is not in plaques or history books. It is in the love that was shared and multiplied, in the kindness shown to a stranger that rippled out to touch countless lives over the generations. It is in the memory of a lonely cowboy who learned to smile again, because a woman sought refuge from winter at his ranch and stayed to become his heart, his home, and his reason for everything that followed. And so the story ends where it began, with love found in unexpected places, with refuge becoming home, and with two people who had the courage to open their hearts when it would have been easier to stay closed. Thomas and Diana Zimmerman lived and loved and built something beautiful from the ashes of grief and the desperation of flight, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we are most vulnerable and most in need of grace. Their story is complete, their circle closed, their legacy secure in the land and the family and the love that continues to echo through the years. The lonely cowboy found his smile. The woman seeking refuge found her home. And together, they created something that would outlast them both, a testament to the transforming power of love and the simple truth that sometimes, in our darkest winters, we find exactly what we need to thaw our frozen hearts and learn to live again.